The U.S. president unrelenting, sharing this image on social media today depicting the Canada-U.S. border separated by an air filter. And it follows these comments Friday.
We're going to put a big tariff on Canada because of the smoke. I've told Canada they have to do something about it. You know, we've never had this problem. All of a sudden we have this problem with Canada.
The week ending as it started with tariff threats against Canada. Monday, the U.S. administration announced new 50% levies on a long list of goods in response to provinces taking U.S. booze off the shelves and Canada's supply-managed dairy industry.
People simply are not aligned with the president continuing to rail against Canada, continuing to attack the country, and also continuing to shape this narrative that somehow Canada has been unfair to the United States.
But the renewed pressure from the president could actually be a sign, says this international trade expert, that trade talks between the countries are ramping up.
Canada is making a move that could leave the United States with a costly mistake. While Donald Trump focused on blaming Ottawa, Canada was building stronger friendships and creating new business opportunities around the world. This silent move could leave America losing far more than anyone expected. Donald Trump posted an image on social media depicting a giant air filter installed along the entire US-Canada border, accusing Canada of willful negligence in managing its forests and threatening tariffs over wildfire smoke drifting south. On the very same day, Canada concluded a comprehensive economic partnership agreement with the United Arab Emirates and signed a free trade deal with Ecuador. While Washington was drawing filters on maps, Ottawa was signing trade agreements on 2 continents. That was the message Trump never expected. Canada is building its economic future elsewhere. The wildfire smoke threat that prompted the exchange was Trump's second such escalation in a week. He accused Canada of failing to clear forest debris and claimed the dirty air crossing the border was costing the United States billions of dollars. The threat built on a broader wave of economic pressure from Washington, including the 50% tariff on a range of Canadian goods announced July 20th, imposed in response to Canadian provinces removing American alcohol from retail shelves in Canada's supply-managed dairy sector. Trade experts noted that this rapid escalation in rhetoric may indicate official trade talks between the two nations are intensifying, following the pattern of similar negotiations between the United States and Mexico. Canada's forestry defense was documented and specific. Canadian officials highlighted a $12 billion investment in fire prevention since 2020 and pointed out that U.S. wildfire smoke has also crossed northward into Canadian provinces during American fire seasons. The argument Canada made was that wildfires are a shared North American challenge driven by extreme weather, not a policy failure that tariffs could address. Smoke does not stop at international borders. Both countries have faced devastating wildfire seasons in recent years. Cooperation, not economic punishment, is the position Canadian officials advanced as the appropriate response to a climate-driven emergency affecting both nations. But the substantive answer to Trump's pressure was not rhetorical. It was the 2 trade agreements Canada concluded on July 24th. International Trade Minister Maninder Sidhu announced in Toronto that Canada and the United Arab Emirates had concluded negotiations on a comprehensive economic partnership agreement. It's been a busy couple of days. We've been at it negotiating, and we literally just walked out of the room with the final touches, Sidhu said. The agreement is intended to cut tariffs, remove trade barriers, and expand market access to the UAE for Canadian exporters. The next steps are legal review, signing, and ratification. And if you want the real story behind how Canada is still holding its ground through tariffs, wars, and hard times, hit join below to join the membership for exclusive documentaries you won't see anywhere else about Canada's progress and rise through uncertainty. The commercial scale of the UAE agreement is significant. Bilateral merchandise trade between Canada and the UAE reached $3.4 billion in 2024. Negotiations were launched during Prime Minister Mark Carney's visit to the UAE in November 2025. At the conclusion of that visit, the UAE pledged to invest approximately $70 billion in Canada, and Carney announced Ottawa was working on a $1 billion project to expand critical minerals processing capacity in Canada. Sidhu said Friday that the UAE investments could include ports, mines, LNG, and major projects. UAE Minister of Foreign Trade Thani bin Ahmed Al Zayedi said he expects announcements about investments, including from the energy sector, will be made soon. The Ecuador Free Trade Agreement signed earlier the same Friday adds a South American dimension to the same-day diversification. Ecuador was the sixth largest economy in South America with a population of 18 million. Canadian foreign direct investment in Ecuador tripled to $4.4 billion between 2018 and 2023, making Canada one of the largest foreign investors in the country. The Canada-Ecuador Agreement includes chapters on labor protections, environmental safeguards, and ethical business standards. Two trade agreements concluded on the same day Trump threatened tariffs over wildfire smoke represents the clearest possible demonstration of Canada's strategic response to American pressure. Carney's government has now signed or concluded 20 strategic trade and defense agreements around the world over the past year. The UAE CEPA and the Ecuador FTA are the two most recent additions to a portfolio that includes the German submarine contract, the Australian radar deal, the KC Lissam's LNG agreement with Germany's CEF, the Saudi Arabia commercial agreements, and the Denmark Arctic Security Cooperation Framework. Canada's expanding relationship with the UAE is an early test of Carney's attempts to attract foreign investment and expand trade relationships abroad to reduce reliance on the United States. Global logistics giant DP World is exploring new Canadian investments, and advanced conversations about minerals are underway. There is documented criticism of the diversification strategy that the script's balance requires, noting, critics question whether these agreements offer meaningful economic diversification. Given the scale of Canada's dependence on the American market, Canada sends approximately 70% of its exports to the United States, and a $3.4 billion UAE trade relationship is a fraction of the more than $900 billion Canada-US relationship. Ethical concerns have also been raised about the foreign governments involved in some of the agreements. The Globe and Mail characterized Carney's UAE engagement as reflecting a values-free foreign policy approach. Whether the new agreements truly reduce Canada's structural dependence on the United States or primarily represent diplomatic signaling remains a subject of legitimate debate. The wildfire dispute itself continued alongside the trade announcements. Trump again threatened tariffs over smoke after sitting with Carney, indicating the two leaders had met or spoken while the wildfire rhetoric continued. Canadian officials defended the country's forestry efforts while emphasizing partnership over confrontation. Emergency Management Minister Eleanor Olszewski's statement, documenting the $12 billion forestry investment since 2020, and Ontario Premier Doug Ford's demand that the United States send water bombers north rather than issue threats, formed Canada's consistent response. Neither country can control where wildfire smoke travels, and both have benefited from decades of cross-border firefighting cooperation. The August 19th deadline on the 50% tariffs is the pressure point around which all of this activity is organized. When those tariffs take effect, Canada faces the choice of finalizing a negotiated agreement with Washington or implementing retaliatory trade measures. The intensified negotiations Carney and Trump agreed to on July 21st are running against that deadline. The two trade agreements concluded July 24th do not resolve the American tariff threat, but they demonstrate that Canada's response to that threat is not confined to the negotiating table with Washington. It extends to Toronto hotel ballrooms where Canadian and Emirati ministers shake hands, and to the Ecuador agreement signed the same morning. The message Trump never expected is embedded in the timing. A president threatening tariffs over wildfire smoke on the same day the country he is threatening signs trade agreements with the UAE and Ecuador is a president discovering that his primary source of leverage, access to the American market, is the exact thing Canada is systematically working to depend on less. Every agreement Canada signs elsewhere reduces the pressure any single American tariff can apply. The UAE's $70 billion investment pledge, the critical minerals processing project, the DP World port investments, and the energy sector announcements Al-Zayudi promised are the substance behind the signal. Canada did not answer the wildfire threat with a wildfire threat. It answered with two trade agreements on two continents, concluded the same day.